Okay, so Mark, we'll begin with my first question, which is, do you think that we're in about the 13th or 14th year of this traditional 18-year property cycle that people talk about, like Fred Harrison, the economist, or and that means that we're on the threshold of another boom, or do you think that we're about to slide down a precipice and the market might crash?
Yeah, I don't think we're going to slide, but I think we're going to perhaps slither quietly into times that will not be as buoyant as we've experienced on the lettings and sales over the last few years, particularly since the pandemic hit us. I don't think 18 months ago anybody would have been talking about 10% inflation or interest rates rising rapidly, but that is what we're being told is a likely scenario. I suppose the market is a response to sentiment. It's very much about how do you feel at the moment. And up until now, people feel confident about the market. There's very little to buy or to rent. Therefore, they're happy to go ahead with purchases or tenancies almost regardless of the price. And that still up until last month, that continues and is still continuing as we speak. How things develop over the next few months, we'll have to wait and see. People talk, well, there's a war going on. Well, there is a war going on. Fortunately, it's not in England. It's not predominantly in Europe. But again, that does affect sentiment because everything you read on whatever subject tends to be pessimistic.
Yes. Yeah.
So that will have an effect. But because we've still got this imbalance of supply and demand, and anybody who's done basic economics, which I did, basic economics, knows that the market risk. Yeah, one of the exams I got, but it is all. If you haven't got enough to stock and you've got high demand or you've got demand, it will keep prices level. And there's nothing at the moment that will show that sort of demonstrates to me that we are going to see a surge of stock because people selling have to buy something unless they can see something to buy. They're not going to sell, and if you're a tenant, you're not going to move unless you can see something better to move to or better value for money. So that's not going to happen. I don't think we're going to see, if interest rates continue to rise, the sort of mass repossessions and default that we saw in earlier property recessions. A lot of people, I think 60% are on fixed rate mortgages, 40% of houses are owned with no mortgage at all. So I think there has been that change. We don't appear to be going to see mass unemployment. In fact, we've got the opposite, where we haven't got enough people to work in the job. So I think that the old dynamics and indicators are probably not going to be replicated, but I think we are going to see a cooling of the market, probably is the best way, a cooling rather than the rampant market house price inflation and rent inflation that we've seen.
So it sounds like you certainly don't think that we're about to go into a period of boom then. You can't see that.
I don't think we're going to go into a period of boom. We know that we're likely to have possibly a general election within 2 years.
Yeah.
So therefore the government and the opposition will be doing all they can to keep voters happy. Do we have a government that is promoting home ownership? Yes, we do. And just at the last weekend, Gove was saying that he wants to create a larger house owning population in the UK and reduce those reliant upon the rental sector. Now that doesn't encourage landlords who are already sort of smothered by legislation and tax, so that they're going to decrease, I think. Interesting. I think it's an interesting time. Property is always interesting, but
Well, that's the thing. We've had things like pandemics that might throw 18-year cycles out of kilter.
Yeah.
That's the thing. So they are unprecedented times. We've also just had a stamp duty holiday as well, which had a big impact. But you think that the most likely thing is that we'll see a gradual slide. And do you think that might be imminent, or do you think we'll still continue to see some slow growth for a while based on the lack of supply?
I talk to agents who are actually out in the field on a weekly basis, and it's still there at the moment. But the experienced ones are saying this. The logic dictates that this will not continue, and they are just. Houses are still selling. They're still selling at the asking price. Less are selling at more than the asking price. Those competing to rent property, we were going through best offers on rented property, which was again unheard of.
Yeah.
That is declining, and I think particularly when you've got issues about affordability or future affordability, people will begin to be a bit more cautious. If they're having to spend money on other things, which is out of their control, they will be more prudent when renting or buying a property.
And the times at which they think they can no longer make capital gains. I know this was something that that Fred Harrison was saying. The guy that came up with the 18-year cycle, he was saying that the bust normally comes when people think they can't make money anymore. I mean, and also when the market's not sustainable, when prices aren't sustainable. I mean, it does kind of feel like we're reaching a point where prices aren't sustainable. But then, while there's lack of stock, it's difficult.
2 years ago, which we're sort of what would have been 1 month into the pandemic, and no one would have predicted that we would have had record house prices for the following 2 years.
Yeah,
and that the industry would be in rude health, and there'll be more there out trying to earn the money out of sales or lettings than there were before.
Yeah. Well, just have to see what the future brings. I mean, you've answered quite a lot of my questions in one there by giving such a detailed answer. I mean, when it comes to inflation, what sort of effect do you think the inflation crisis will have on the property sector, specifically inflation?
Well, I think it will go back to my point about affordability. So those on a tenancy where they paid a premium rent, and at the moment rents are continuing to rise, but they will have utility bills that they'll have to pay. They may or may not be in control of who provides their gas, water, and electricity, so they're sort of locked into that whilst they've still got rents. That applies to homeowners, but we know the proportion of take-home pay that a renter has to use to pay his rent is about 60%, whereas a homeowner is around the early 40s. So there is more of a buffer if you own a property than if you rent a property.
Yeah.
Difficulty is, of course, if you are a renter trying to save during that time, whilst still paying a premium rent. That is great difficulty, and that's not going to get any easier.
Yeah, we need somebody to get onto the phone to Vladimir, don't we, and tell him to stop.
But I mean, we are.
We need a resolution.
Tomorrow we have the Queen's speech. Now, what's going to be in there for property? I suspect it'll be something about no fault eviction, Section 21, which will give tenants less confidence, will be less encouraging for landlords. We know the supply of housing is not going to jump in terms of new housing because the building industry is suffering from lack of resource in terms of labour, but also cost of materials which are rising inexorably with waiting periods. So to suddenly say we're going to go from 200,000 new homes in a year to 300,000 is just not achievable.
Yeah, that feeds in actually to another question I was going to ask you about the government's plans or the rumoured plans to reintroduce the right to buy, the incentives there.
Well, the right to buy that they are allegedly planning to introduce will apply allegedly to social housing.
Yes.
There isn't enough social housing as it is. It performs a huge service allowing people to have accommodation that they couldn't necessarily afford in the private rented sector. It will reduce the stock, and we know what happened when Margaret Thatcher sort of had a free-for-all on the right to buy. It eliminated a huge tranche of houses available to rent at a stroke. So I think there will be caution if that's what they're going to do. We shall have to see.
Yeah, I mean, one can see the political motivations for doing so, considering that the Tory party the Conservatives want to present themselves as the party of home ownership,
Yes.
Which has often been the case. So it'd be interesting. I mean, I haven't read too much too much positive feedback
No.
in any of the papers about this initiative. So it'd be interesting to see if it's just kind of politely put to one side now. It'll be interesting to see where it goes.
It's all about levelling up, though, isn't it, James? It's all about levelling up.
Yeah, which is the broader policy initiative. Yeah. Well, perhaps we'll switch gears a little bit and perhaps change the subject. And I wanted to. I mean, hopefully now we're coming to the end of the COVID-19 pandemic. Hopefully there'll be no more nasty variants on the horizon to scupper everything, because I mean I don't see how the economy can cope with another hit like that. But really, I wanted to ask you, assuming that we are coming out of the pandemic now, whether you think the pandemic will have any lasting impact on the property sector.
Well, I think it's had a positive impact in terms of how people view properties. They're more selective. They can use technology to a far greater extent. I think agents will be able to continue, probably sadly with less staff, because that's how they get round it, less sets of premises. So I think that's all positive. In terms of how we service the property market, probably 25 years ago, I would have said that you won't recognise the property market and agents letting or sales in 25 years' time. Of course, they're almost identical. Are we going to see a change in portal usage? I suspect we will, because I don't think agents will be willing or able to continue to pay the rates that they're currently being charged. I think there'll be ways that they can do it themselves. And it really is whether educating the consumer. I think what we can hope for is a much faster transaction time period. That still hasn't changed. We're still at 18 to 20 weeks from a sale agreed to exchange of contracts, which is absolutely ridiculous. The law surrounding property purchases is 100 years old in 2025, I think. Nothing has changed. So if somebody can look at that, and I know I've been working with the government since they admitted that the property market was broken, but we're going back to David Cameron, but nothing has materially changed. So I think we will see some change, whether it's going to be in this parliamentary session or with this party or with this government, I don't know. But I think there will be pressures. We know that the lenders are very keen to look at things. We know also the government's looking at the energy efficiency of homes, and they're looking at energy efficient mortgages for those that have got very low EPC. We know that you can't replace your gas boiler in 3 years with a gas boiler. So I think there's going to be a lot of change, but if you could make it no one looks forward to moving, really. Well, they do, but in a sort of blinkered way. It's a bit like when you have your second child, you've forgotten what the first one was like.
That's very true.
Until they're 5. But it's a bit like, everybody goes into house moving, it's going to be fine. The agent's obviously telling them everything that's positive, but, it's fraught with delay, it's fraught with uncertainty, and that's why the letting industry is functioning well. Is because it's very relatively easy to get to take on a rented property.
I'm wondering whether this the race for space and will stay with us, or whether people are going to gradually start returning to the office, and then rather than trying to be on the fringes of a town or in the countryside, working from home, whether they'll.
I would have been traditionally in London probably at least 2 days a week, but that doesn't happen anymore. Old London, the prime central London is relatively quiet. Still seems to be that, as you say, race for space, and it's not just a British phenomenon. I know in France, happening exactly in the same way. I know in places like Canada, and if you talk to anybody, whether they're in the States, whether in Canada, whether in Europe, it's lack of inventory. So it's this sort of philosophy, this psyche is not just confined to the UK, although we do have a different view about property than other countries. It's all about investing rather than quality of life, and perhaps, as you said, the quality of life aspect will continue to be dominant.
Yeah, I think people have found that working from home is actually more productive than they anticipated, and people get used to. I mean, the commute takes up so much time, and that could be spent.
Yeah. I mean, I went to a board meeting last week. Fantastic to sit in the same room as everybody. It's a board. Some of the people have never been in the same room together, never actually physically met. But it was 3 hours to get there and 2.5 hours to get back. And you think that's 5.5 hours.
Yeah. And not good for the environment either to travel all the time. No,
but whether we'll go back, it's difficult to say whether people are prepared to do that, or whether people's view of where they want to work and what they want to do will change with a balance of a work-life balance rather than a work till you drop, and it doesn't matter if you sit on a train for 3 hours a day because that's what everybody else does.
Yeah, I mean, it's different. Different bosses seem to want different things, don't they? And different people have different. I mean, some people like the commute because it's time to themselves. If they have a busy home with kids running around, they probably quite enjoy the solitude of a commute. But it's
yeah, I could. I think that's right. But whether that's going to continue, I don't know. We know that certain bosses are not happy about working from home. They're not sure whether their people will be actually work, or just sending the odd email to keep people happy.
So maybe the pandemic will have some impact in that hybrid working. People have seen how easy it is now, and they don't want to let that go. And so there'll be some impact, but perhaps not a dramatic one.
They don't want to let it go, but most people will say, actually, I'm working harder from home because rather than have my breakfast and commute, I have my breakfast, walk into another room, and start working.
Yeah.
I can't finish by 5, I'll have a break or something to eat, or 6, and then I'll go back. There's no, he's out at the moment, you can't speak to him. Well, he's not out.
Yeah, can't get away with that one anymore.
No hiding place.
Yeah. Well, we've got loads for the already from talking to you. Just with those questions, we've covered so much ground that I don't think we need to go on too much longer, and it'd be good if we can keep it to under half an hour as well. So I just wanted to end on a quite a fun question, because we've just spent 20 minutes or so trying to predict what might happen. My final question is, why do you think so many forecasters get it wrong?
Well, having been in property for nigh on 50 years, I think they either try to be too scientific, and it isn't scientific. As we said, it's about sentiment. All right, there are investors out there who'll buy for investment, and they'll be very specific about the yields they're looking for and other indicators. But I think the average man in the street doesn't react that way. So I think the forecasters, if you ask a forecaster, how long do you think people are spending in their existing home? Or 7 to 10 years. No, it's about 20 or more. How long do you think transactions are taking? Oh, it's 12 weeks. It's 18 to 22 weeks. And it depends what indices these forecasters are using. And if you look at the way that these various indexes, property price indexes, are calculated, they're all calculated in a different way. The Halifax is different to the nationwide. The nationwide is different to land registry. So we're not actually comparing apples with apples to whether or not we actually get the right answer.
It's just striking how, I mean, it goes back to the first question that I asked you, that some people can think that we're about to enter a prolonged period of boom and it's only just beginning. And other people see a catastrophic crash. And these people are both experts in the property sector. They're both being fed exactly the same information and coming to completely different conclusions.
Trouble is, sometimes a grey answer is not very newsworthy, is it?
Yes, and that's probably...
And you ever go back and look at the forecast that was made 12 months ago? Actually, sometimes you do, and they're probably... And most of them are wrong, or they're not quite right, or they're like a business plan. It will all be all right in year 3. Yeah.
I mean, I think don't they say that in general, economists, not just in the property sector, but economists per se, they're very, very good at analysing what happened in the past, but not so good at necessarily predicting what might happen tomorrow.
They give you bar charts for everything and wonderful statistics, but they can't actually tell you what's going to happen tomorrow. Unless it's snowing everywhere and then the market just stops, but that's just...
Unlikely in this period of global warming. Brilliant. Well, thanks very much, Mark. That's been really useful.